Coming into the importance of setting some travel is knowing how to see everything in positions and calculations, clocking grounds, clocking zeros, clocking anything line positions. We all live in positive lines and negative lines of settings. We communicate to how you position lines of travel, how you use that in human residence, your powers, your generations, your kinesis systems, all can modify how to really extend that. The powers, the modems, the Wi-Fi, satellites, towers, and everything attractions to your systems. So for the Earth to be in its own setting, to its own operation, it's all tracked to its communication to its playgrounds. Okay, 244 flux. The proper sequence of clocking, which the avatar travels through, is all can modify. It has processed the position of 01, 02, 03 to 09, 12, 24, all the way 144 flux. That processes its playground. Directing ground centers is an audio line centers to interconnection system to all levels. Triangulation communication setting to travel, directing ground center line communication lines of service, calculate and modify how to get in position locations, measure and scale. Balances everything location setting to your 6 habitations or 6 inhabitations. Inner space to outer space to inner space. So now we're in position location settings. Okay, so that's how it's going to be set in travel. How to get position lines because we're out of zero gravity now. So in that position lines is 2 centers. Set lines of 0, 24. Let's start with attractions and directions. Okay, change ground centers. Okay, set position here. Okay, 0, 24. Okay. All right, so you got 0, 24 lines of setting, operation lines of sequence. All right, so in this position here, 0, 1. Okay, 0, 2. Start with that line conditions, right? And then over here, okay, set calculation lines is 0. Travel communications. Directing ground centers is the failsafe, okay, which is formation lines of grounds. What's position lines of settings of truth, and set lines of communication lines of truth, and false and set travel, okay? Okay, so the foundation lines are equal lines of course centers and performance with efficacy and location to a system, author triangulation and condition systems. So 24 is the 0 line operation of center operation, okay? 0, 1 is the triangulation of flux over 3 centers lines of travel. The process, it's about creating a flux capacitor through the earth line, okay, through truth and false narratives and set lines of communications. Truth is who you are. False is what you aren't until you identify false is all levels of false itself, which is its yang to its yang, yin to its yang. So it's a polarity of in the consignments and course centers and constellations and direct location system attractions. Okay, so in that position locations, process lines, calculate and modify, line set communications, negative line condition setting, -1, -2, and negative set position of 3 and set attractions. Okay, so run both on equal line centers. Process indicates in setting, process lines, false over truth over left, truth over false over right, right? Because that's the earth line. Space line course centers and box frame course centers lines of travel, directing ground centers and set lines of sequence location lines of travel, sets calculation lines of ground set lines of high position lines of travel, direct lines of signals and location system and square root. Triangulate and position lines of processing communication system all through tesseract and tetrahedron. All right. Directing ground centers, calculate and modify. Now the window frame course centers lines of truth and position lines of false into truth and travel. Sets communication high grounds, calculate and modify. Process in that indication system all through settings of flux. And then we shift line into the position lines of 3 set line communication settings. Tethers and attach to set course centers into its highways and travel in position of 3 over 6. Okay, so the flux capacitor comes in. Okay, in timelines and settings. Okay, in its communications. All right, there's the flux capacitor. That's how it's set up now. All right, so it's getting complicated now because you have a tipping scale on both sides set position positive over 0, 1 and negative over line position -1, -2, -3. All right, so this process the grounds now. And it's set position to its wavelength systems all through travel. That has its computer operation system, its computer. Okay. All right, so as we come in line position of flash drive, correlates the system at time frame, process lines and direct signals, number lines of sequence, and then liking setting your flights. This is all through your keyboards. And that starts with 0, 1. Interesting, right? Flight 1, flight 2, flight 3. Back in setting the sequence back to 0, back to 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5, 0, 12, back to 0, right? So now you understand how to operate the line position location to its computer operation setting attractions, right? All through flux. 0, 1, negative 1, right? Now, we understand how to use that in that information system that changes everything locations of course of time, right? Now, once you get in that position lines of 3 centers, we process lines of another 3 line position location system all through attractions, okay? And then we cross the angles on all platforms. Now, it's going to get more complicated now because we come to higher screen adaptation settings of attractions through pyramids, 2 pyramids of screen adaptation. Cross lines of signature lines of 2, 3, 6, 8, and 12 set positions. Okay. Then we come to the central setting in open sequence, open panels, in wormholes, in acceleration setting, and travel communications. Okay. And then we add lines and rotation surface and travels in the opposite direct state location. And then we direct the line signals into 3 lines of centers, process the portals of communication center stargates, 1/6 over screen, 3 lines of setting over travel. And then we process the indication system with set calculations. Ground centers of service, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, comes in all position location and settings, okay? And then we go through another line rotations to infinity 8 rotation surface interactions. And then we rotate the settings of its routers its set location system, all through structure, all through division, all through location system, and calculation. Okay? All right. So it's really interesting when you see it, how it all comes together in set positions. Okay, all through settings. Okay, understanding line centers of AI signature lines of grounds and set lines of communications. All right. Timeline sequence, time reactors. 2 centers, line course centers, central line condition setting, keyboards, keyframes, key calculation, screen adaptation setting, attractions. Okay, solar generation lights, high formation lines at grounds, and battery line course centers, line communications. Power cells, power lines of 1 over cross line, battery reline course centers, lines of travels, directing ground set course centers and reset position location to a system off their attractions. Directing grounds and high lines of sequence, all through communication system, all through flux, into its playgrounds at 144. Okay? So, that's how it's all this sets up location setting to your Earth now. And rotation to its system all through travel. Very powerful stuff, right? And then we get a line course centers. Now that puts lines at its position of its tether to all line course centers, line communication of 4 settings that communication lines of travel. Okay? Now, in that position, we go through time scale, time edit, time space. Modulate the system's lines course centers and the circuitry elements in mainframe communication setting calculations. Okay, it's track course centers of its light bulb inside. Light bulb, light bulb. Question, question, right? All right, so this light bulb goes on. We go centers line condition setting that puts it to there's attachment set course centers lines communication setting a surface. Okay, we correlate the outside in and the outside out in rotation surface attractions. Okay, directing inside lines, and the light bulb goes on in sequence in set position, inside traction, right? And we go in the opposite directions. 2 rotation lines and position lines of tether attached to set course center location of battery. Battery course centers, line communication system, all through attractions, all through operation. Okay. All right, so we got the propellers lines, and we come to high course centers lines calculation setting and travel that puts all communication system all through its highways that modulates the course centers lines calculations. All right, so we symbolize the lines into figure 8 and rotation lines of grounds. Sets core lines of communication lines of travels, the rotation lines internal to external force of a continuous force, a process communication system of clocking zeros and ones and set position location settings all through traction. Okay. All right, so we go into the line centers, into time reactor lines. This is all lines in fusion locations, the fusion reactor. So lines inside rotation and travel endpoint graphs and line communication system attraction. Directing ground centers, highline condition setting. Blue plasma walls, line course centers, outside signal. Rotate the system and infinity D8 line rotation outside tractions into false narrative. Process that indicates the system off their settings. Its operation sequence, off their tractions, off the location. Okay? All right. As that comes in line centers, the kinetics and high center comes into the earth line. We color the ground lines of 3 signals and rotation lines of ground sending to surface. This rotates the tethers in location of Echo sonar, Echo Zulu 1, Fox line, X-ray Zulu in process communications. Ground centers of surface interactions, and then we highlight the signals into magnetic force highways that process the oscillation wind paths into geotherian, geometric, geological, geographical, and line screen navigation settings all through flux. SPACETIME communicates the highest centers lines of travels into 144 lines of playgrounds. Indirect ground centers in sequence. Now this puts all modulation centers in location system of 01, 03, 06, and now 09. Triangulation course centers and psychological connection system with their settings, all through operation sequence. Highways align direct signals at ground centers set position location 24 lines of scale, 48 lines of measure, 72 frame line positions, into 0, 24. Time sequence times 4 is 144. Overline signals over pi, percentage over screen. And directions and track correlations. Okay, now position location. So the Earth is this turning into its own computer of its own projection now. Earth is in its own projection line wheel. Processing in the line centers, then we come into line course centers into position of its water lines. 7 lines in line, intertake, outer take. Course centers, 98,000 line centers in measure and scale. Process the barometer thermometer, directing lines into 98,000 flux. In set position, 98,000 lines and settings and 144 flux. Process the indication system that calculated modifies the echo line centers and water containment systems. So try to understand how this all works into the Earth itself, into 98%. That process ground center location time set lines and sequence lines of 1,000, 98,000 Kelvin. Process sent lines in Celsius and Fahrenheit. Set course centers lines of summer, spring, winter, and fall. Sets communication high centers lines of calculation system in tractions. Now directing line course centers process position location to its cycle. That comes into all calculate and modify. Directing ground centers into the line centers of geostorms. Set lines of communication setting and angles. Process that indicates the system all through travel and track correlations. All through Earth. It's your Earth. All right, so your Earth is lined as communication lines of angles. The process indicates the system all through set lines. And we go through all communication lines and circuitry line centers, which is the motherboard. Directing ground centers and set positions. Operation lines of settings. We center offline inside rotations into truth and false narrative, false and truth. Set communication lines of 1 cycle. Sets course centers of 2 line settings, right line signals, and location lines of left line rotation, service, and travel communications and directions, right? Okay, so then we come into the blue lines, which is the water containment system and 7 bodies of water. Balance lines, operation lines, direct course center lines of U. Process lines indicates the setting of flux over lines. Process indication system is 01. That communicates the ground centers of service. That puts lines of programming. Data process lines in rotation, service, and tractions. Okay. Turn your Earth in rotations to a CPU and rotations in 144 platforms of its playground and travel communications. Okay, so inside lines, highways and line course centers, injection, and fusion lines into time reactor. Rotates the system outside line centers as space anomaly. And rotation service and travel communications. All through setting, all through calculation. All right. So we work with inside the mapping system. Okay, there's a mapping system of 45 line angle. Process indicates and setting and set calculation, inside traction, right? Working with inside the wheel itself in rotation. Okay? Center up line connects to set up the flywheel, fly line centers, rotation cycles, location setting, circulation, process indications of rotation centers and travel. Okay? Then we allocate time frame, overline sequence, and position lines of right over left over right, line communication lines of travel. 4 lines of flux, 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of scales. Earth rotation surface and travel, indirect signals and location system, all through calculation setting. Okay? All right, so now we have that set positions, all along with set calculations. Directing grounds and high lines of sequence all through flux. Okay? All right, so we color the ground centers. We illuminate the setting line, position, location centers. We offline the system of its infinity wheel. Its offline charges, directing ground centers of 0 lines of 1. Signified lines over 2 over settings. 3 signals, location system, all through attractions. Okay, illuminate the ground centers. Process indicates lines of settings. And set attractions, all through locations. Okay? Okay, so we work within the flux lines of Earth lines of space and space lines of Earth in the flux over screen. Adaptation of surface interactions, right? Now to illuminate the ground lines, we have 222, rotates line cycles that keeps in ground centers of served outline signals, location system, all through flux capacitor. Time reactor, time shift, lines of anomaly, and 4 settings of communications. Ground centers service, electrical line panels, process line indicates in system, all through traction, all through location of mapping system. Process and indication lines, ground centers, and rotation system of grounds of operation. Okay? Then we come into the pyramid. Process and indication lines, outline signals, outer space, line signal location lines, helter skelter, formation line course centers, location setting to its pyramid traction. Directing ground centers, high line sequence, we process and indicate line centers. This overrides the system lines of settings. Indicates here and processes here through pi and set position to instructions. Okay? All right. Then we change the time frame. The change of course centers of time communicates in the sequence. Process of 1, 2, 3, 6, and 8, 12 lines of platforms and traction. Directing ground centers crossing angles of 45 angle and rotation line surface. That sets communication setting to time scale. Sets communication system all through setting to its operation sequence locations. Okay, change in timeline measure. Process and indicates in the line of its pyramid to its astral projections at set position of 0, 1. Sets travels, point lines of graph. Directing lines of 7 lines of waters. Calculate and modify in screen adaptation system all through flux and screen. Process the indication system changes all communication lines and setting into its part acceleration system of its infinity 8 and rotation lines of cycles and traction. Directing ground centers line communication system. Now, both platforms come to setting in center line operation lines of sequence and locations together in sequence. Okay, and then we modify the line centers of circles and rotates the lines of alignment location setting as shift lines of anomaly. Process and indication lines of 4 lines of flux in rotation system and travel communications. All right, we change the angles, point lines of graph, and center communications and settings. Okay, offset tractions. All right. Okay, so I'm just showing you what goes on with your Earth now. It's already done, just showing you exactly what you already have to identify. How the Earth rotates its cycles and locates its setting to position location of systems. All coloration lines of triangulation line course centers into flux over line, directing ground centers location system. How to time frame its line center location to its graph. Center calculation screens adaptation to its flux. Rotates its cycle location system off the triangulation settings with author operation set lines. That communication system all calculate and modifies and travels. Now direct lines of clocking, Fibonacci lines of sequence, location of 0, 1 of gravity. Process indicates the system. Now we work outside the Earth, now we're working inside the Earth. Okay, so the Earth line centers, process indicates lines of 4 pyramids and rotation lines of cycles. High generation screens, 2 lines of flux, 4 lines of measure, 5 lines of scale. Sets calculation lines of 7 over lines, 2 over set position lines of 12. Sets communication high grounds and line position location measure. The scales the communication system all through tractions. All through setting, all through operation lines of 4 lines, setting lines, separation lines of 4 pies, sets lines of 3 scales in a set position to its measure. It operates its location setting inside the Earth rotation system of inhabitation lines of 6 over screen, 6 over travel, 6 over directions, and 1 grounds of surface and set traction. Directing ground centers line signal location system opens all calculation lines of the Earth. Okay, sending lines course centers, directing ground centers into the ground center locations. Inside line settings, process indicating system all through settings. Flux over lines, process lines of indicating system all through tractions at 3 centers of scale. Well, let's put that in there. Octet center lines, 4 signal locations in Earth line rotation, and travel communication lines of 0, 1. Sets calculation ground centers, shift lines of anomaly, and rotation surface and tractions. Directing ground centers, process lines, course centers, line condition setting. Forestry comes in. Directing ground course centers, line condition setting. Process lines, high position location system, and allocates time line communication system off the setting. Time reactor lines, infusion over line rotations, sets communication setting, and time calculation of scale. Scales communication height direct signals, process indicating lines. Now, in that position location high centers, we process the communication system all through line connection setting of cloak and dagger. Setting the communication system all through tractions through square root. Directing ground centers calculation lines, we had flux over 1, flux over 3, 6, 8, and set lines of 12 and track communications. Directing ground centers inside line condition set to its structure of design line that simulates a system through an open windows of panels of operation set tractions. Okay, so it's amazing how you see the mapping system of the Earth in traction all through platform. Okay, I know it's a lot to take in, guys, but it's very powerful stuff how this is all set up. Okay, through your computer operation of its computer itself. Splitting anomalies. Okay, so now we add line centers. We constantly get 4 lines of flux here. Now, the observation line comes in as an optical system, which changes all lines and modification lines of time frame that process communication lines of 0 lines. Sets calculation lines of grounds and position location of its system all through its inhibitors, the auxiliaries, the inputs, the outputs, and the audio signals. This ground center location setting into position of 1, 2, and 3 set communication lines of travel. Okay, then we go on 6 lines and highways as set position lines and calculation lines of travel. Sets calculation lines over cross line angles in 1/3 line ground and 4 settings of signal locations, and setting line operation line sequence and line condition setting 3 scales of communications. Direct inside line is set communication system all through structure. Okay, you see it? All through structure and settings. Okay. So you go more in and you start to see the simulation, all levels inside tractions. Windows frames, track frames, communication lines, all through set positions, its operation system, all through tractions. Okay? All right, so now we work with the platforms over centers, over 3, over 6, 8 lines of 12, and 14 lines of travel. Okay? Then we inside lines and rotate the system in calculation setting and correlations. Directing ground centers, we change the frame line. Okay, so we don't change the travels, but it changes time setting and sequence location system and 0 traction. Okay, and then we modulate line centers. We graph communication lines of 4 centers of signal and location, setting ground centers, offline centers into 4 signal location setting and travel, and direct lines of lines. High signal location setting, change communication system to all levels of pixelation grounds and set travels of its Earth in rotation setting. There's your Earth. Okay, that's your playground. So working within the playground, we go through the line centers inside flux. We go through the pixelation lines of grounds, box frames, triangulation frames, high formation lines, centers of travel, 3 centers of signals, and singularity and 4 centers of communications. Pixelation grounds and set lines of sequence. All right. Then we go into line centers. Remember, it's all calculated and modified through blue, calculates lines of position of red, and that corresponds line conditions and settings. Process indicates in the cloak and dagger. So in line centers, we process the communication setting, constellation centers, light metaphors, pixelation graphs. Sets calculation lines. Then we go into green line center. In box frames, triangulation and pixelation lines and holograph line screens, adaptation to 144 playgrounds, insert travel communications. Directing ground centers, high lines of sequence. We communicate lines and settings. We have purple screen lines, that's infinity over lines of crowns. Directing signal lines of ground communication setting all through travel. Sets communication high signal location system through calculations. All formation lines of Earth of its rotation. Okay? Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, and Earth 4. All setting and direct signals of grounds of surface and travel communications. Okay? Your holographic Earth. Okay. Woo! Powerful stuff, isn't it, when you see it travel? It's pretty amazing stuff, too. I mean, you start to recognize what this is in set position. because everything starts making sense, how this all works in communications. How you put this all lines and all line position, location, and measure and scale through operation. Okay, inside position. There's your Earth. Inside, outside locations. That's false narrative. Processing that in all different angles. How you see your Earth in set position of 0, 1 and set tractions. All through platforms, all through setting, all through operation sequence and communication. Okay? Very, very powerful stuff. All right. Done by equation. Okay? So your Earth is coming in its own line positions now. Pixelation lines of grounds, 144 flux, into its playground and set travel. Okay? It's amazing when you understand the mind of conceptual setting into its calculation system and communications. All through tractions, all through locations. Right? All right, so we have center up setting as sequence. We have purple screens, directing lines and calculation setting. Process indicates the system. I've set it up, but it disappears, right? Because you're not allowed to see it yet. So I change the correlation lines to blue, comes in signal line connection setting, and plasma interference. Process line course centers, the 3 centers of measure. Process lines indication setting, process lines of indication setting, process line indication line communicates to its surface. Process indication system, all through tractions. It 5 measures and scales of 5 elements. Process inside rotation, inset lines circle. Portal communication lines and flux over setting the circulation rotation lines of screens. Let's do that again in set position. Okay, set calculation of grounds, high sequence, high panels, and row graph, and communication holographic gridding in set travel communications. Set line signals, location system, pixelation lines over flux, 45 angle line rotations in all lines of routes, rotation lines of cycles. High generate the screen adaptation sending on line centers, 3 signal lines of 1, 3 signal lines of 2, pi generation lines of 4, settings of sequence, location system, all through laser and travel. Okay, sets communication high centers in rotation service that locks the system, location system, all through tractions. Very powerful stuff, guys. All right. Okay, so working with that lines, we change the angles of point communication lines of graph as simulation line conditions, all through center operation. All right. Okay. Reroute the routers in one signal line conditions high operation lines of sequence, sets communication system and calculations. That disappears. I'm not going to put it in again because you're not ready yet. But I'm just processing everything that's already done through its equation. Then we go through pink and line screen adaptation center. That is not ready either. It's set positions. All right. But the operation set lines of signals, 3 centers of travel. Process indicates lines of 3 flux over the screen adaptation setting into communications. High signals, outline signal, inside rotation, surface, and traction. Face recognition. Okay, so we process the face lines into illumination lines and set lines of sequence. Process here, and 3 set communications. Okay, offline centers, let's process that position. There we go, traction, happy face. All right, rotate the line centers and line communication system all through travel. Okay, sets calculators and grounds. Now, I know it's a lot, eh? It's a lot to take in, but it's amazing when you see it in line positions, inside and out line rotation, all through traction, all through locations, all through frame, in a 45 line angle, and rotation lines of surface and travel. Okay, all through simulation. Inside, in line settings, in rotation system and tractions. Okay? Galaxy shift lines of anomaly, guys. Okay? All right. All right. All right, so we're going to change formations, 3 centers, and location. Okay? Now, understanding direction is knowing exactly how to communicate that setting location to its cycle. Knowing how to connect with high centers, lines of travel, and direct lines of link. This process indicates the system all through setting, all line connection setting to its calculation. All right? So indicates everything in travel, simulation grounds, high location system, all through setting, all through operation. Okay? If we understand how this all works, then we understand how the Earth works and set location to its own hologram. and it simulates everything inside in its playgrounds and set position to its locations. It's playground. 144 flux. Okay, so I know it's a lot to take in, but you have to understand what's really going on with the Earth itself and travel. Okay, very powerful stuff. So it's knowing exactly how to set things up in location settings, in wind graphs of oscillation system, in Colossus, in direct signals of galaxies and set traction. Okay, change formation lines. Look at that in set positions. Constellation system. All right, so set line community centers. Remember, the alignments comes in lines of sequence to go from line center positions to here in set traction. Directing ground centers, signal location system and settings, so clouds of interference. Process indication over line settings in locations upside line setting locations, and shift lines of anomaly. Okay. Process indication setting, the sun comes in line centers. Okay, comes in program set lines, data process lines of sequence, and set travel. Okay. And the moon is surfacing lines of triangulation line course centers of communications. Okay, coming in position lines of green, and coming in position lines of orange, and coming in position lines and positions of purple, and travel calculation lines in position location outside lines into black, set lines of high position location lines of pink, process indication setting of travel. Oscillation wind paths, process line course centers and northern lights. Now, in that line centers, we see the graph communication system all through settings, all through operation, in travel communications, directing lines of link, directing lines of panels, process indicates a system of grounds of surface and travel. Okay, set calculation of lines of grounds, high sequence, and line screen adaptations of flux over screen. Okay, all right, so set calculation screen centers, line connection system, that's you in set travel. And set positions, that's you. All right. The operation line sequence comes a channel operational lines in indication system to the sun and the moon, rotate the cycles location system, and 3 centers of line communication setting calculations. All right. Ground centers of service rotates the service and travel. Comes in line course centers and face recognition. Okay, now we understand that line centers rotate in its service and 4 centers of angles and screens, and that communicates system of the set lines. So it's lines that communicates lines of point graphs that sets lines, calculates, and screens into its position location to its system of the calculation of travel. You know exactly how to serve its location system of the setting of their operation lines of sequence. Okay. Okay. So there you go. Your holographic Earth. It's all set up into its setting to its playgrounds and 4 centers and signals. 4 center lines of 1, panels over 2, panels over 3, and panels over 4 in set sequence. Sets communication system, all through tractions, off the locations. All right, so now we have to understand the clock and centers and set line communications, all in settings, all through operation, set lines of center operation. Okay. All different angles too, because it's important you understand how this all works now, how to work within the simulation setting, inside and outside traction. All right, so we separate lines of anomaly. That's 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 location to its setting. Back and 0 of fail-safe communication. All through setting, all through routers and routers. All right, now we go through center line, new highway line rotation, sets course centers lines of communication setting at the surface. Sets calculates lines of grounds, set position of 1, okay, into 3 centers, 6 over measure, 9 over scale, 12 over sequence, and position lines of 1 surface and travel. Okay. Okay, so we indicate the lines and triangulation line in the system of the setting. Okay, change timelines into pixelation centers and surface location system of the set tractions. Okay. Constellations, there's in set travel. Okay, work with that alignment, Okay, so calculation lines. All right, so there's Mercury. Okay. And let's bring in Pluto. Pluto's there, Mercury's there. And we have Jupiter in cross line, inside rotation, inside direction. Side communication high settings. Cross indication lines, change time center location through cycle, in location system, and tether through attachments. Directing ground centers high lines of sequence. Process indicates the system of the set line operation. Square roots to pi. Okay. Inside rotations and travel. Off the setting, off the operation. Okay. It's amazing how you see it through a map and system location through pi. Amazing how you see it through all levels just through a highway. You can't see it from here until you identify it from here in set position. Okay? Because everything in its online centers, its own location system, all through tractions, all through locations. Okay? Very powerful stuff. Right. But I just want to show you how this is all set up now. Okay? 3 0 1s and your negative 1s. All right? All right, so send lines and sequence lines, calculation lines, split lines, anomaly, 3 travels. 1, 2, 3. Set position equal lines into 1, 2, 3. And line condition setting. Point graphs, calculations. Ground centers lines of 1. Process over cross lines of 2 in set position. Set calculation lines of grounds. High line sequence across line angles and process line communication. Directing calculation setting. There's your pyramid in set position. Okay. Angle point line graph communication. Okay. Sets calculation of 1, 2, 3 lines of tether, process lines, and high course centers, hieroglyphics, and travel. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines, 9 lines of screen definition. Process and indicate line centers in graph communication setting, and triangulation line course centers, Echo Ziller, Foxtrot, line condition X-ray and set position. Inside travel. Then we go inside lines, door records time frame, door records time frame, door records time frame, and 3 cent line communications. Directing ground centers, high lines of sequence, platforms over setting, prop line centers, platforms over screen definitions. Pyramid activation lines of screens, process line outside line connects setting lines of travel. Directing ground centers, line conditions of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in set position. Setting graph, screens adaptations, process indicates in system of the calculated setting, and travel communications. Okay? Indicate ground centers, high course centers of 4 lines of flux, 3 lines of screens, and 4 settings and communications. Sets calculation ground centers, inside line setting into your solar line communication system, all through travel. Okay, indicates ground centers and triangulation system, all through set position. Okay. So I'm just showing you so many different angles how you have to really see things through a hologram into the central setting of your Earth, pixelation graphs and calculations. Graphing communication setting all through different angles and travel communications. Okay, your structures. See, your holographic structure design. So once you get into that, then you just color it in. Let's color the box frames, and we're going to outline centers. I'm just going to start with the online sequence. Time measure and scale and process communication system attractions, right? Directing ground centers, online sequence, offline calculation setting into set positions. Starting off with 0, 1, 0, 2, and 0, 3. 0, 4, 0, 5, back to 0 and travel. Okay? So once you get into pixelation lines, then you start how to create the holographic streaming and direct lines of signals. Okay, it's a system of calculations. Okay, creating the holographic city in set design. So I'm just trying to get you to understand locations, how it modifies the 144 flux of its playground in set travel. Okay? Because that's how you see everything around your system, right? It's all through hologram. Just understand how to do it through your own engineering skill sets. And that communication system off the calculations. Off the structure, off the design. Okay? Let's bring in some green. Now you can overlap the highways because you're constantly changing the correlation setting of plasma. Change communication lines of angles, change communication high centers of service. You're never at the same frequency and set position as calculation. Creating lines of anomaly, line rotates its cycles, line communication setting, everything back to 0, guys. But you don't want to go into negative lines of 1 because your process and constellation system changes everything through consolidation. All right, so you want to stay above the system lines of settings all through tractions, all through locations, all through setting, all through set positions, to its holographic system in traction. Okay? Let's just color it in. Stay within the line frames until you understand how to do box frames in lines of 0, 1. Okay, so I'm just getting you guys to understand how to come into higher lines of sequence so you can start to recognize how the avatar created it through a pixelation graph in set position of 0, 1 of clocking. It's a travel. Okay? And there's the map. There's the map. Okay? There's the highways. Okay, it's really interesting when you look at it, right? It's pretty wild stuff. You know, it's turning into a hologram now. It's all pixelated, and you know, it's amazing how you see it in all ways and forms, in set positions, travels, right? Directions. Okay. Just showing structure design line. How it comes in set positions, how you create it. All right, so as the Earth comes in, that line comes sending locations. You understand coolants. Coolant set position lines in 98 line settings and not 1,000 lines in Pyro, of course, standard calculation in Kelvin, direct lines in position of Fahrenheit or Celsius, knowing exactly how much coolant you're going to be using. How many lines of seconds, minutes, and hours are you adding through frame? Direct lines and communication lines, you can use your box frames, you can use ruler frames, you can use anything in travels. So we indicate here, indicate here, indicate here into box frame communications. Okay, so now you have an outline window with an inside tractions to a pyramid. All right, so now you're going to work with outline centers. Then we come into position to its pyramid outside tractions and set position illumination. Okay, so you see that's behind the pyramid, right? And this is behind the wall in set position. Okay, so it's all coming together now, right? Pixelation graphs. All right, so you work with that line conditioning system, and then you come into position lines through its highways, platforms over here. Change communication lines of time frame and position, right? And then you come into this platform, and then you come into this platform, and then you come into all set calculations, directing ground, setting lines of sequence. Process indicates in here, in 3 centers of travel. Direct lines of ground is a calculation, right? So that's in front, that's in set position, in settings, that's in set tractions. So what you understand that everything is always in the front of everything, right? There's no front, there's no back, there's no up, there's no down. It's just empty space. Basically, your mind itself is morphing into everything in triangulation, all through configuration setting, all right? Okay, so you have time plates, tablets, signal lines, high centers lines, communication lines of travel. Directing ground centers into crop circles, 3 signal lines of flux over screen adaptation lines of travel. Okay, and then you can change time scale and rotation surface and clocking communications, right? So the I division lines of 1, process lines of 2 over lines in spectrum, directing outline centers and rotation lines of flux over screen, and I division location setting of windows and traction. Okay? So you're constantly creating different levels of structure and design line. It's pretty powerful stuff when you come to that positions. Online setting, online sequence, online communication system, all through setting, all through the simulation. Okay? Very powerful stuff in travel. All through schematics too, all through formula, all through equation. Okay? And then you see the map. There's the map. Okay? And you're working with the map, and you got line signals and location setting to, let's say you get, this is one simulation board. That's a simulation board. That's a simulation board, and here's another simulation board of a game. You got 3 game boards, right? All right, and everything on the game itself, okay, is set position to its settings. Okay, let's say it's game 1, right? Simulation grounds, correlation lines of track centers, indirect lines of communications. Setting sequence, process in-line, outside-line communication lines of tractions, all right? Setting lines of volume, setting line position, location, system, and calculations, right? And then you set up the platforms. Okay, platforms 1, platforms 2, and platforms 3, all right? And then you correlate the system lines of calculation setting and travel. And it's set position to location system and calculations. All right. So it's amazing how you set up your simulation games inside the map of the set tractions. Look at that, all through the simulation. Right, so that's above seen below, right? It's above seen below, below is seen above, but I'm just trying to get you to understand how you come into the actual simulation of itself, into the simulation games that you put in position. All through attractions, all through locations, all right? All through setting, all through operation. Okay? All right, so this is all set up for your Earth now. It's all done. Okay? It's all done in the simulation. It's already done in equation. You're just seeing it now through your infinity lines. But understanding how to graph is really understand how to come into colors and lines into your highways. Right? Know exactly how to come into your platforms of travel communication through settings, right? And then you can basically go into colors now. You go into colors over cross line settings of travel. Okay, and then you bring it in set positions. Okay, and then you can cross the angles in 3 set positions. Right, and then you can bring in the red. So these are the things you guys can do in set travel communications. Setting correlation setting, triangulation line condition setting configuration. Know exactly how to timelines the centers, location system of their attractions. Right? And then you see the platform, right? You bring in the platform in and set positions. Okay? And then you color it in. Color it in, color it in, color it in. One color. One color is all color, all volume. Okay? So basically it's true to understand how it overrides everything, puts everything, all line centers, it cancels, deletes, erases it, and now it's standing in front view and set travel. All right? Change the angles, change the communication, change the coordinates and set position. Okay? All through setting, all through operation. And then you work with inside, you work with inside lines. Okay? Or you work with inside lines again, right? And you work graph line communication setting, all through attractions. Right? Just everything that you can do in set position with road graph and set travel. All through setting, all through operation, all through sequence. Okay? So you guys are reaching those levels now. How to really come in positions, how to create your Earth in a hologram, and understand how to create a mapping system in location setting to a structure of design lines in set position. And seeing everything of its simulation of its mapping system. Okay, so your simulation games. Okay, all through volume, all through mass. Okay? So, I think we're good on that line signal and location to its cycle. Know exactly how to service that position, location, and travel. How this overrides everything locations, because this is what you're focusing on. You focus on one particular thing, and you bring it out. Right? You bring it out. Okay, let's just go in cloak and dagger in 3 centers of signals and location of settings. Okay, and you just bring it out. You can really, really see it in travel communications. Right, so that's how it works in operation to your simulation lines. So it gets you a lot more understanding how to work with that information system, all through pixelation system, in your travels of your holographic structures of your cities and set design. Okay, which your mapping system. All through setting, all through attractions. Okay? All right, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. If you have any questions or comments, let me know on set position lines at travel. Okay. Adios.